Good morning. Today I want to talk to you about They Say, I Say introductions. This may be a fairly new form of academic writing for many of you. It's something that I myself was not introduced to until I was in grad school. But you're going to be using this move of academic writing often throughout the course of the semester, and it will become a part of your research paper. So I want you to begin by opening up this handout, the They Say, I Say handout, which is available to you in your modules section of the course. I'm going to point to particular passages that are important. So let's begin then on page 12. First things first, I want to talk to you about the difference between an argument and an opinion. All of us have opinions, but in an academic setting, your opinions don't matter. So let me give you an example. An opinion might be something like, I prefer vanilla ice cream to chocolate. I think it tastes better. That opinion is not based in any fact and really isn't something that I can challenge or argue against. An argument is something that is based in fact. So using that same example, I could say something like, vanilla ice cream is healthier than chocolate ice cream or other flavors because it does not require any added flavors, sugars, or preservatives. This is something that is based in fact and is something that a listener or reader could respond to or argue against. So what we're going to be working on this semester is creating arguments, not opinions. So you'll see here on page 12 this passage. It says, the immediate goal of this book is to help you become a better writer. At a deeper level, it invites you to become a certain type of person, a critical, intellectual thinker who, instead of sitting passively on the sidelines, can participate in the debates and conversations of your world in an active and empowered way. Ultimately, this book invites you to become a critical thinker who can enter the types of conversations described eloquently by the philosopher Kenneth Burke in the following widely cited passage. And here you see this passage here, this example of a party. You come in late. When you arrive, others have long preceded you and they have engaged in a heated discussion, a discussion too heated for them to pause and tell you exactly what it's about. You listen for a while until you decide that you've caught the tenor of the argument. Then you put in your oar. Someone answers, you answer him. Another comes to your defense. Another aligns himself against you. The hour grows late. You must depart. And you do depart with the discussion still vigorously in process. So I want you to think of academic writing as being part of an ongoing conversation, one you must first listen to before you can contribute to. Over the course of the last couple of weeks, you have been listening to this conversation about dystopian fiction, and over the next few weeks, you will add to that conversation with your own writing. This same idea is summed up here on page 3 of the handout. Here it reads, for us, the underlying structure of effective academic writing and of responsible public discourse resides not just in stating our own ideas, but in listening closely to others around us, summarizing their views in a way that they will recognize, and responding with our own ideas in kind. Broadly speaking, academic writing is argumentative writing. And we believe that to argue well, you need to do more than assert your own ideas. You need to enter a conversation using what others say or might say as a launching pad or sounding board for your own ideas. And this is something that, again, you've already been practicing. You've already learned the art of summary. And earlier this week, I asked you to find arguments within an article that you agreed with, that you disagreed with, or that you agreed in part and or disagreed in part with, as a way of sort of promoting your own thoughts, feelings, experiences, and ideas. It may surprise you to hear that good academic writing is actually argumentative. As it says here on the bottom of page 7, you may have always had the impression that in order to succeed academically, you need to play it safe and avoid controversy in your writing, making statements that nobody can possibly disagree with. But the truth is that this is actually a recipe for flat, lifeless writing, and it's not really academic. What academics do, what scholars do, is they challenge the sort of traditional ideas to try to push the envelope so that we can grow intellectually, socially, culturally. And you're going to be challenging other authors and other ideas in your own writing this semester. The first thing that you'll do in constructing a they say, I say introduction is start by introducing the conversation. What are others saying about this particular topic? So you'll see some templates for this. One really good one here is on page 9, and I'm just going to fill in some of the blanks using a random topic to help you get a better understanding of this. So it says, in recent discussions of public education, a controversial issue has been whether online education is as effective as traditional face-to-face education. On the one hand, some argue that virtual classes are just as good as traditional face-to-face classes. From this perspective, it is a good idea to encourage students to learn from home, especially during a time of especially during a pandemic. On the other hand, however, others argue that online education is less effective. In the words of one of this view's main proponents, students are generally incapable of being self-motivated, which makes online education a waste of time. According to this view, students should be in the classroom regardless of the dangers that COVID might cause. In sum, then, the issue is whether students should be in the classroom or learning from home. So you'll see how this kind of template can help you sort of establish what others have said about a particular issue. I realize that for many of you, this kind of template may feel a little limiting, and you don't have to use this kind of template word for word. It's really there as a guide to help you understand the movement, the move of academic writing, the entering of a conversation. You've entered into, using that earlier metaphor of the party, you've come to the party. What are other people arguing or saying about whatever topic it is that they're discussing? Okay, and I want to show you some other templates. Here on pages 24 and 25, you'll see some more of those templates that make similar moves to the one that I showed you on page 9. So again, you could use these templates word for word and simply fill in the blank. When it comes to the topic of public education, most of us will readily agree that it provides a necessary service to a democratic society. Where this agreement usually ends, however, is on the question of online education, right? So using that same topic, just sort of filling in the blanks. Or you can use this template as a kind of guide. Either way, the goal here is to make that move, to enter into the ongoing conversation. Once you've done that, you're going to take the next step and actually incorporate a they say by quoting or paraphrasing an actual source or scholar. Here we are back at that first template on page 9, and if you'll look here about 2/3 of the way through, you'll see that there's actually a space for quoting a source. And now that source doesn't have to be somebody you agree with. In fact, it can be somebody that you disagree with, and you can simply quote them as a way of positioning yourself against that quote. We're going to talk about that in just a second. There are also other templates for introducing what they say, what a scholar says, or another academic says, and you can see those on pages 21 through 24 of the handout. I'm scrolling down here so that you can see that. Starting here on 21 and then scrolling through to about 24, 25, you can see some of those templates. Right. Once you have established the they say, the ongoing conversation, and hopefully also included an outside source in that introduction, you're going to position yourself against what they say. And you practiced this earlier this week. You're going to agree and add to what they say. You're going to disagree and explain why you disagree, or you're going to agree in part and disagree in part. So I'm going to show you some templates for that. So here you'll see on page 57 through 59 some samples of templates for agreeing with a they say. So here it says, I agree with so-and-so because my experience with whatever confirms it. We talked a little bit today about, or earlier this week, about how dystopian fiction encourages this belief in the goodness of community and how it's sensible to want to belong. It's good for you psychologically to belong to a group. So you could say that you agree with the author because your experience in high school organizations confirm that belief, right? So you can talk about your own experience. Here you could say how an author is right because there's been more recent study on a particular issue. So we talked about that as well. She mentioned how, or the author mentioned how dystopian fiction can actually create more empathetic readers. And we talked about how there are recent studies done by universities like Harvard to support the argument that reading literature, any kind of literature, promotes empathy. So here you'll see templates for agreeing and adding to. Remember, it's not enough to agree. You must also add to the ongoing conversation. On page 55, you'll see some templates for disagreeing with they say. So here you'll say the authors claim that reading makes one more empathetic, rests upon the questionable assumption that literature is a more valuable form of education than, say, video or video games or something like that. So again, you could just sort of fill in the blanks using the templates, or you can just sort of use them as a guide. You can also agree and disagree simultaneously, and I'm going to show you some templates for that. The templates for agreeing and disagreeing can be found on pages 60 and 61. So here's a random example. It says, although I disagree with what much of the author says about dystopian fiction, for example, I fully endorse the final conclusion that reading literature makes young people more empathetic. So you can agree in part and disagree in part, and then explain why. Last but not least, you'll end your introduction with an I say. An I say is just a fancy way of saying your thesis or argument. So here on the home page, you'll see the announcement for today's lessons. If you'll click on that, you'll see there's a video here, lesson 1, with quiz. That first lesson is on how to create thesis statements. So you'll end your introduction with a thesis statement. I want to end this lesson with a sample paragraph to give you an idea of what you're going to be doing for homework this weekend. So here's a sample paragraph that both agrees and disagrees with the they say and uses that first sample template on page 9 to get started. So it begins, in recent discussions of dystopian fiction, one controversial issue has been whether or not these novels are appropriate for the middle or high school classroom. On the one hand, some argue that themes of government surveillance and adolescent resistance encourage young adults to subvert adult authority and engage in actions that make them less safe. Others, like Ugly's author Scott Westerfield, argue that the dystopic nature of the high school environment, complete with cameras, security guards, and metal detectors, make adolescents the ideal audience for exploring these themes. So here in this first section, then, you have the introduction to the conversation. We must then offer a specific they say by quoting or referencing a scholar. Author Sean P. Connors agrees in his article, I Have a Kind of Power I Never Knew I Possessed, Surveillance, Agency, and the Possibility of Resistance in YA Dystopian Fiction, and adds, quote, educators can create opportunities for students to reflect on how they experience the gaze in their own lives and how they are capable of resisting its unprincipled or unethical use. Notice the use of quotation marks, the parenthetical citation, the use of ellipses to show where I've cut pieces of the quote out, etc. So here I have my they say that I must then position myself against, and I've agreed in part and disagreed in part. While Connor's argument is sound, the examples he provides are not. Drawing on characters from M.T. Anderson's Feed, Suzanne Collins' The Hunger Games, and Cory Doctorow's Little Brother, Connors, using the words of Michel Foucault, argues that these characters prove that people are always freer than they think they are, but I disagree. While organized group opposition in these novels is certainly effective, hold on one second, I want to make sure you can see. While organized group opposition in these novels is certainly effective, the individual acts of resistance each character engages in are ineffectual at best and suicidal at worst. So here I have my positioning, right? While I agree with some of what the author says, I disagree with others. Particularly what I disagree with is the examples that he uses to support his argument. I feel like the examples are weak. Then I have to end with my own I say, my own thesis or argument. Here I write, using the same examples provided by Connors in his article, I argue that Titus, Violet, Katniss, and Marcus Yarrow illustrate the general powerlessness of the individual, the dangers of enacting resistance, and the strength that only comes in numbers. So I make it very clear that I'm going to be focusing on these texts to make this argument. Again, you're going to want to review that video on writing thesis statements.